Hey guys, I'm here to clear up a misunderstanding that happens during the reality creation process when you are manifesting a completely new life, when you're changing your identity in the present moment. Why does it seem that things get worse? Why does your reality attack you? Why does your mind attack you? What is going on in this process? I'm going to explain the transition, what I've conceptualized the identity death sequence. And so the purpose of this masterclass is to correct one of the most important misunderstandings in the manifestation reality creation space. Most people think that if a transformation is real, then it should feel good. They think that if they are fully aligned, then things should immediately become smoother. They think that if the process is working, then reality should quickly begin confirming it now. And because they believe that, the moment when life becomes unstable, the moment when reality stops giving them emotional reassurance, they assume something has gone wrong in the reality creation process. And that is what destroys the assumption. That assumption is what destroys the process completely. And that is where most people lose. They lose because they do not understand what is happening when the old identity begins to die. And because they do not understand it, they misread resistance as failure. This masterclass exists to permanently correct that belief system that when you're transitioning in your identity in the present moment, you understand what is happening to you internally and externally. And so let's go ahead and go to the central principle. Reality reflects identity, not what you want, not what you say once, not what you do for 3 days, not what you intellectually agree with, not what you affirm in the morning and emotionally contradict by the afternoon. Reality reflects what has been accepted as self. That means your external world is not merely responding to your preferences, it is responding to your state. It is responding to your internal baseline. It is responding to what feels normal, what feels true, what feels expected, and what identity your subconscious has stabilized. This is why people do not manifest what they merely desire, they manifest what they are. If reality reflects identity, then changing your life is not primarily around getting new results. It is about becoming a different self. And if becoming a different self is the real process, then what matters most is not the first emotional high of deciding of change. What matters is what happens when the old self starts resisting replacement. That is where the real work begins. And so, what I tell people all the time and what I do on my calls is I say the conscious mind wants more. I would like more money. I would like a better relationship. I would like a better body. I would like a better house. I would like a better car, and so on and so on. But the subconscious mind, the part of you that is unconscious, is what's manifesting. And so, even though the conscious mind is like, yes, I would like this, the subconscious is what is determining whether or not you're actually going to go out there and do what you need to do to have an identity that would manifest it. And that is why majority of people are not manifesting what they desire. They're not receiving their prayer because they're not in the identity of giving themselves the desire because the subconscious mind does not believe that they want it. They say that they want it, but internally they're not aligned with that version of themselves. And so that is where the real work begins. But let's talk about how reality is actually structured in the three planes. So the biggest reason people misunderstand transformation is because they do not understand where reality actually is created from. They think life begins on the physical plane because that is the only plane they are trained to trust. This is the physical plane where you and I are seeing each other. You see money, clients, sales, messages, opportunities, rejection, delay, the visible outcome, right? And and because the visible outcome is what they can touch, they assume it is the cause, but it is not. Reality does not begin on the physical plane. It ends there. To understand why things appear to get worse before they get better, you first have to understand the three planes of creation clearly and practically. You see, the first plane is the spiritual plane. The spiritual plane is pure awareness itself. It is the deepest level of self. It is the observing presence behind your thought, behind emotion, behind personality, behind a self image. It is the part of you that can notice a thought without being the thought. It is the part of you that can notice fear without being fear. It is the part of you that can notice an identity pattern without being trapped inside that identity pattern. Many traditions refer to this as awareness, presence, the observer, or the I am. This is important because transformation cannot begin from total fusion. If you are fully merged with your current identity, you cannot change it. You can only repeat it. The spiritual plane matters because it is where separation becomes possible. It is where you realize, I am aware of this pattern, which means I am not identical to this pattern. And that creates the first crack in the old identity. How I've explained this before when I talk about merging your awareness with your identity is the Batman Bruce Wayne concept. Bruce Wayne, when he's in trouble, let's say he's at a bank and the bank is getting robbed, everybody else, all the other NPCs are scared, hiding behind the desk or hands up. Bruce Wayne is the only one calm, collected in the situation. Why is everyone else scared and Bruce Wayne is the only one calm and collected during the robbery heist? Bruce Wayne understands that he's Batman. Underneath the external layer of being Bruce Wayne, the persona, he understands internally that he's also Bruce Wayne. He knows from a higher level of awareness, he's looking at things from a different level of perspective. He is not conforming to the external world because he understands that he has leverage that other people around him don't see. And that is the awareness, the presence, the observer, the I am that I am. You see, most people have identified and merged with their identity. They become the world. They become what the world tells them. They identify with everything they've experienced in the world. But that's because they have not been taught how reality is structured. They don't understand that reality is created as within, so without, as above, so below, the law of correspondence. And so they merge with this identity of themselves, a fake persona, a persona that has been inherited systematically from beliefs, curriculums, education, your peers, your family. They've identified with this persona that has been built from the external world, not understanding that they don't come from the world, they come from God. And so if you don't understand that you are pure awareness itself, presence, the observer, the I am that I am, it's going to be hard for you to move forward in this process. I recommend you watching my Batman Bruce Wayne video. I'll link it in the description. So the second plane is the mental plane. The mental plane is where identity lives. This includes beliefs, assumptions, imagination, meaning making, expectations, internal dialogue, self-concept, and subconscious programming. This is the blueprint layer of your life. If the spiritual plane is the level of awareness, the mental plane is the level of design. This is where your subconscious stores what money means, where your mind stores what success means, where your system stores what pressure means. This is where your emotional memory and identity structure live. So when a person says, I want more money, what determines how that plays out is not just the words they consciously say, it is the mental blueprint underneath those words. If the conscious desire is abundance, but the subconscious meaning of money is stress, then the mental plane is divided. And whatever is divided within eventually creates friction without. The third plane is the physical plane. This is the visible world. This is where circumstances, business results, relationships, opportunities, money, events, and outcomes show up. This is the slowest plane. This is the final expression. This is the visible printout of what has already been accepted upstream. That means the correct order is this. Awareness shapes identity. Identity shapes reality. Or said in another way, spiritual plane to mental plane to physical plane. Now, this is what most people do. They live in reverse. They let the physical plane tell them who they are. Money slows down, so they become scarce. A launch underperforms, so they become doubtful. A relationship gets tense, so they become insecure. A delay happens, so they become behind. But that's backwards. That is an effect trying to become a cause. You see, the physical world is not the cause and the effect. The physical world is an effect. You see, who made this? Whoever designed this chain, whoever designed this cup, it had to be created from the mind. Even if machines are making the things now, who created the machines? Who had the idea for the machines? Who had the idea for the schematics? Everything has to be in existence, had to exist first in the mind of someone. Everything in existence was created from God, in the mind of God, in the physical being of God. And as humans were made in the image of God, man has the ability to create. not just men, but men and women, just to make clarify. But men has made in the image of God creates, and we create from within the mind first. And so the physical world cannot be an effect and cause. It can only be an effect because the mind is the cause. But the mind is only one layer above the physical realm. And so it's the spiritual plane that is above it all, where the decisions making are, where you're aware of what's going on in your reality and not identifying with the external world. But we'll go deeper. So this is why majority of people are stuck, because they've identified with the physical world. They've identified with the physical dimension. And that's backwards. This is an effect trying to become a cause. And that's exactly why most people stay trapped, because when you allow the visible world to define your state, you stop operating from the higher planes and begin living as an effect of the lowest ones. Now let's connect this with the topic, right, of the point of this masterclass. If real change begins on the spiritual and mental planes, but the physical plane is the final domino, then there is always going to be a phase where the internal identity is changing before the external reflection has fully updated. That gap is where confusion happens. That gap is where instability happens. That gap is where people assume the process is failing. But that gap is not failure. That gap is reorganization. And so this is what happens when a person is actually changing, what is actually happening within a person when they're changing or trying to change their life. When somebody says they want to change their life, what they usually mean is they want new results. More money, peace, stability, ease, relationships, expansion in business. They want to stop feeling trapped in the same emotional patterns, which has created the same emotional reinforcement of their current reality, where they feel like they're stuck in a loop, where it feels like they're replaying the same day over and over and over and over again. What they usually do not understand is that they are not merely asking for new results. They're asking for a new identity. Your soul is calling for expansion. And identity is not just thought, a statement, an affirmation, or a sentence in a journal. Identity is a system. It is the accumulated pattern of what you believe, what you assume, what you emotionally expect, what feels normal, how you interpret situations, what you focus on, how you react under pressure, and what your subconscious has accepted as true. That means your current life is not just being produced by one belief. It is being produced by an organized identity structure. And this is why change feels hard. This is why people run away from change. Because you're not just replacing a thought. You are confronting an organized structure that has been repeated long enough to feel normal. And normal is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. People often protect their identity even when it produces results they do not want. Because identity creates familiarity, and familiarity creates psychological safety. A person can consciously hate their current life and still unconsciously protect the identity producing it. Why? Because the current identity is known. It is familiar. It is psychologically mapped. The nervous system understands how to survive inside it, even if it suffers inside. The unknown identity may produce greater freedom, wealth, ease, success, peace, expansion, but it is still unfamiliar. And the subconscious often treats unfamiliarity as danger. So the moment you attempt to become someone new, you are not merely moving toward a better life. You are threatening the psychological structure that has kept your current self coherent. That is why the old identity resists. Not because it hates you, but because it is organized around preserving self. Now, how does the subconscious mind play, and why does it fight you when you try to change? Because it ties together. The subconscious mind is where your identity is stored, right? And so let's talk about why things manifest externally that you don't want, and why your head is fighting against you when you're trying to change. I'm taking my Shilajit, by the way, guys, so you got to bear with me so I can take my Shilajit. I love that stuff. So to understand why things start feeling worse during transformation, you have to understand the role of the subconscious mind more precisely. The subconscious mind does not evaluate ideas the way the conscious mind does. It is not primarily to respond to logic. It responds to emotional intensity, repetition, emotional familiarity, and what feels true. What feels true. That means there are always two definitions operating inside of the mind of a person. There is the conscious definition of what they want, and then there's the subconscious definition of what they want. Consciously, someone may say, I want more money, bigger business, more clients, more peace, more visibility, more growth. But subconsciously, those same things may mean money equals stress, success equals pressure, visibility equals judgment, growth equals more responsibility, more income equals more people needing me, expansion equals loss of peace. Now think about what that means. The person is internally divided. One part wants to move forward. Another part experiences forward movement as danger. That is not a motivation problem. That is not a discipline problem. That is not a strategy problem. That is a subconscious conflict. That is why people are not manifesting their desires, because they inherited emotional associations to the things that they want, either through emotional intense experiences or emotionally intense observations. And identity work is not shallow positive thinking. It is conflict resolution. Now take it further. If the subconscious is emotionally conditioned around their current identity, then the old identity is not merely an idea. It is a safety pendulum, structure, pattern, system. That means when you attempt to become someone new, the subconscious does not hear, we are upgrading. It's hearing, we are leaving what is safe. And that is why the old identity pushes back the hardest right when the change begins to get real, because the subconscious mind has to restore equilibrium. And this goes into the identity death sentence. Now, we can lay the sequence out clearly, right? The first stage is awareness. This is where you begin seeing the current identity more honestly. You notice patterns that were previously invisible. You start recognizing that your reactions are not random. You begin to see the same loops repeating in money, business, relationships, performance, and self-concept. You recognize that the external world has been mirroring, the English language to get to me sometimes, something deeper. This is the beginning of transformation because awareness is the first crack in unconscious repetition. So the awareness is the spiritual plane. The second stage is separation. Excuse me. The second stage is separation. This is where you realize that what you have been experiencing is not your deepest self. You begin to see that you are aware of thoughts, aware of emotions, aware of reactions, aware of conditioning. That awareness creates psychological distance. And once that distance exists, change becomes possible. The third stage is identity installation. This is where you begin intentionally adopting a different self. You stop focusing only on the goal and start asking a deeper question. Who would I need to be for this reality to be natural? You begin thinking from that identity, deciding from that identity, interpreting from that identity, and practicing the state of already being that version now. And this is the process that I see with my own clients in my business, of that me getting them from point A to point B by removing subconscious blocks so that they can double, triple, or quadruple their monthly income. And that is the stage of the process. It's first making the client aware of what's going on. I have to make them aware of what's keeping them in the same loop, because if I tell you what's going on, you're not going to understand it. You're going to conceptualize what I'm saying, but you're not going to have the awareness of why it's happening when I leave you. And so my job is to make you aware of what loops are happening in your reality so you can be like connecting the dots and you're like, oh wow, that's why I do that. That's why this manifests. That's what's keeping me stuck. The second stage of the process is separation. Now that they're aware of what's keeping them stuck, now I have to separate themselves from the old identity to the new one that we're creating. Now they're aware of what's keeping them there. Now that they can fight it with awareness, they can fight it with the fact that they're noticing that they do these things. Now they can focus on being the new version of themselves. And then obviously the installation process, you continue being that version of yourself. You continue being aware of what's keeping you stuck and you stop doing it. And through my process, my clients change. The fourth stage begins. after the identity installation. And this is, again, the point of the masterclass. The fourth stage is conflict. The old identity has not disappeared. The new identity has not yet stabilized. So now both exist at once. Old identity, it's what's familiar, automatic, emotionally conditioned, reinforced by past evidence. The new identity, intentional, chosen, clearer, but not yet normal. This creates internal tension. And what tension does is reveal what has not yet been resolved. This brings us to the fifth stage. The fifth stage is subconscious resistance. Because the current identity is tied to what's familiar, the subconscious begins pushing back against the change. It resurfaces old fears, old reactions, old emotional loops. It amplifies what would normally pull you back into the known self. This is the stage where most people say things like, why am I suddenly doubting again? Why are my old thoughts coming back? Why do I feel more emotional now that I'm changing? Why does it feel heavier than before? Because the old identity is not passively fading. It is actively trying to survive. And this is why things manifest, because it's not just a mental game of doubts, fears, anxieties, and worries manifesting in your mind. This can show up as people treating you disrespectfully, something happening in your relationship, something happening in your business, something happening to your physical self. It can manifest in the form of anything physically and mentally. The sixth stage is destabilization. This is the stage most people call things getting worse. Life becomes contradictory. Momentum feels inconsistent. Things that seem to be moving may suddenly slow down. Unexpected problems may appear. Pressure may increase. Old habits may flare up. Business may feel emotionally heavier. A person may feel less reassured than before. And because they do not understand this stage, they assume the process has failed. But the truth is actually the opposite. This stage is not proof of failure. It is proof that the old structure is being destabilized. And destabilization is required before a new normal can be established. You cannot stabilize a new identity while the old one still remains fully intact. Something has to break. Something has to lose coherence. Something has to stop feeling natural. And that is why this phase happens. And now you have a better idea of when you start to change from the pure awareness level itself, why the physical realm is the last domino to fall. It's because you have to go through these stages of identity removal and identity installation. This is the identity death sequence. The first stage is awareness, then you separate yourself, and then you install the new identity. This is the fourth stage is where conflict appears. This is where old patterns start resurfacing. The fifth stage is subconscious resistance. And then the subconscious will resurface old fears, reactions, old emotional loops. This is where the manifestation process happens against you. So your old identity is manifesting things that you don't want. The last stage is destabilization. And this is where people call things getting really bad. Life becomes contradictory, momentum feels inconsistent, things seem to be moving, may suddenly slow down. This is when things are truly fighting against you in your reality. And this is the process where most people revert back to the old self, thinking that they have changed in a way that they didn't want to, or that it's not working, or that they failed in the process. But that's not true. What's actually happening is the old identity is destabilizing, and it's in its removal process. It's being killed off. But the fact that you're reverting to it, or worse, conforming to the world, conforming to your circumstances, your conditions, the events, or emotionally reinforcing the reactions that are manifesting, it's going to keep you in the old identity structure regardless. And that's why it feels like things are getting worse. Connect the dots more deeply. It feels worse for two reasons. The first one is heightened awareness. Before the person starts changing, they were unconscious inside of an old system. Their reactions felt normal, justified, the loops felt like reality rather than conditioning. But once awareness increases, they are now conscious of patterns they used to live inside of automatically. That means the same person, that means the same pattern now feels louder. Not necessarily because it became stronger, but because they can now see it. So part of what feels like things are getting worse is actually things becoming more visible. The second reason is the survival behavior of the old identity. The old identity survives through reinforcement. And reinforcement happens through reaction. Every time you react the same way, interpret the same way, collapse the same way, panic the same way, doubt the same way, or emotionally identify the same way, you are feeding the old identity. And this is why the real loop looks like this. An event happens, you react. There's emotional reinforcement, identity confirmation, same reality. Let me explain again. Someone cheats on you. You emotionally get insecure, upset, angry, start crying, start being upset. Now you're telling yourself a story of that you are unlovable and that people always cheat and that love is hard to find and that people always shit and that there's never going to be anyone for you. And now the identity has been confirmed again. The old identity has now manifested this because your subconscious, your identity was going to change. And so it said, if you're really going to change, you're moving past your baseline. And so we want to restore equilibrium. So we're going to resurface your old patterns, old loops, old identities, see if we can get you back into the old state. And so now that you've identified with the cheating and now you think that that's your story again, now the old identity says, here you are, you're back in the old identity system. Now we can keep you where you're comfortable and safe. And now you're in the same reality. And that loop is what keeps the old self alive. So when you begin shifting, the old identity tries to create the exact conditions that would normally get the old reaction out of you one more time. That is what people need to understand. The old identity is trying to trigger one more confirmation, one more panic, one more collapse, one more story of it's not working, one more moment where you hand your selfhood back to the circumstance. Because if it gets that, it proves to the subconscious that the old identity still rules. Now connect the dots. That is why things feel more intense. That is why old thoughts resurface. That is why contradiction appears in your physical world. And that is why life often seems to push exactly where your old identity is weakest. It's not random. It is identity preserving itself through reactivation. And that is why things have to get worse before they get better. It's not just a saying, it's what the whole human civilization has noticed because we're unconsciously manifesting. We're always manifesting Luke 17:21, the kingdom of God is within you. And so the whole society has conceptualized that things have to get a little bit worse before they get better. And they think it's a systematic belief or a paradigm that they inherited. It's actually our subconscious programming happening real time. And that is why change, everyone that's had to change themselves went through this process and then conceptualized through age, through experience, that they know that when someone has to change, when they're giving someone advice, that they know it's going to get a little bit worse before they get better. And that is why that happens. That's why we believe in that systematically without even realizing it. Because it's unconscious. Because the majority of people don't understand that they're always manifesting. It's very beautiful. So very beautiful. Now, and that's why most people quit at the wrong moment. You don't fail in the beginning. The beginning is easy. It's exciting. It's full of possibility. They fail at the point of contradiction. They fail when the old identity is being tested and the new identity is not yet externally confirmed. Let me explain something to you with my life. I've been going through something recently, just to be vulnerable with you guys. And it has been hard mentally, emotionally. But I started to realize that, one, I don't go through anything for no reason. Two, God always has a path for me. And three, I deserve happiness, love, peace, bliss, fulfillment, always. And I allowed myself to feel the emotions. I felt the grief, the suffering, the sadness. I felt the loss. I felt everything I needed to feel. And then I killed it. I removed everything that reminded me of it. I put it out of my mind, not in a avoidance type way, but I allowed myself to feel everything, and then I allowed myself to move on and not identify with that story anymore. Because if I didn't feel those emotions, then I'm suppressing it and I'm hiding from it because I don't want to face it anymore. So that's still suppression. That's still identity avoidance. But I faced them head on. I felt everything I needed to feel. I got everything out of my system. I got the anger, the sadness, the pain, the betrayal. I got everything out of my system. And then I said, but my story is peace, bliss, fulfillment, happiness, and love. That is what I deserve. And so despite what I had went through externally, my identity has not been destabilized. My identity is still here. And that takes mastery. That's mastery, practice, consistency, repetition. And I'm telling you to tell this, that I don't just tell you this to make you feel better, to make you feel, to give you motivation. I'm telling you that this is a system that which you live your life by, a lifestyle. And that no matter what happens to you, you always find your center. You always find your grounding. You're always connecting with that peace of God inside of you. No matter what suffering that you go through, as long as you understand that connection, nothing can truly get you off of your path. Nothing can truly hurt you. And that is what this masterclass is also doing, giving you an understanding that even when you're going through the identity destabilization process and things are getting worse, you have your center because you're aware of it. You're connecting with that peace of God inside of you because God gave you awareness. God gave you free will. God gave you the ability to choose. But the world did not teach you how to control it. And that's why I'm here. And so here's the final test. It usually happens in most people as a manifestation. It manifests like a contradiction, a slow week, a missed close, a surprise expense, a setback, a delay, a moment the external world does not give you the confirmation you wanted. For example, I love myself and everyone loves me, and then something manifests where someone clearly shows you that they don't love you. Now, what the subconscious really is asking in that moment, it is asking, who are you now? Not when things are good, not when the numbers are up, not when you feel inspired. Now, who are you in contradiction? Who are you under pressure? Who are you when the old reality tries to trigger the old self? That is the final test. And most people think that the test is there to disprove the process. Incorrect. It's there to test the installation. Because if you remain the new identity exactly where the old identity used to take over, the subconscious begins receiving a new signal. Not from your words, but from your being. It begins to register, this is who we are now. This is what is normal now. This is how we respond now. This is the new baseline. And that is when the identity starts becoming real. Not when you said it, when you held it under contradiction. And so detachment is the key here. Now, I made a video on detachment already. It's the Batman principle. It's going to be in the description below. But let me talk about detachment quickly. So this is where detachment becomes essential. Because without detachment, none of this can actually stabilize. Detachment is what prevents the event from becoming identity. Now, don't misunderstand what detachment is. It's not emotional numbness. It's not passivity. It's not pretending not to care. It's not suppression. Detachment is the ability to remain yourself regardless of what is happening around you. Even deeper, it is the ability to stop identifying with the old version of yourself when reality triggers it. That means detachment is the bridge between awareness and stabilization. Let me explain. When an event happens, most people become what happened. Money slows down and they become scarce. A rejection happens, they become unworthy. A delay happens and they become behind. A performance dip happens and they become doubtful. That is identification. The event itself is not the full problem. The problem is who the person becomes in relation to the event. Detachment breaks that. Detachment says, this may be happening in my world, but I do not have to build identity out of it. That is the power. Because once the event no longer has the authority to define itself, the old identity loses its fuel. And once the old identity loses its fuel, the new one can stabilize. And that is why I told you earlier in my example of what I was going through recently. I felt the emotions. I was triggered. How can I not get angry? How can I not get sad? How can I not get upset? How can I not feel all the normal human emotions? I'm a human. I came here to feel and feel and experience the human experience. The problem is that people identify with the event. Now that they got rejected, now that they tell themselves they're not worthy, now they tell themselves they're unlovable, now they tell themselves the world exists to hurt them. They've identified with that person as self, and now reality is structured around that because they believe that in awareness. They believe that in the mind, and now they're physically operating in the world with that belief, and now reality has created a systematic world where that is their truth. Because the brain has no choice but to filter out your bias. It's called the RAS. And so they're living within their own confines of their own prisons. And that's why I always say, if a belief does not exist to serve you, it will destroy you. And so you need to understand that detachment is not just being passive and not just caring. Detachment is the gateway to going from where you are now to where you want to be. You need to be able to not identify with the events, circumstances, and reactions that happen to you, because everything is neutral. You assign the meaning. Every event that will happen to you is neutral. A breakup, a rejection, not getting the job, a delay, not getting the sales call, the post not blowing up. Everything is neutral. But how you interpret that is creating your identification. And so let's talk about what stabilization actually is, because that's what gets you out of the state of this is what transitions you to the new identity, the new reality. Stabilization does not mean feeling good all the time. High frequency. It's not it. Stabilization means the new identity has become more natural than the old reaction. It means your default is changing. It means that under the same conditions that used to produce collapse, you now remain. You do not need reality to emotionally authorize the identity anymore. You are no longer waiting for the next scene to tell you who you are. You are no longer checking the world to see whether you are allowed to remain the new self. That is conviction. And conviction is not loud. It is not performative. It is not an emotional hype. Conviction is stabilized inner certainty. It is the end of inner negotiation. This is why embodiment matters. Because identity is not real until it starts showing up physically, in posture, pace, standards, tone, decision making, emotional recovery, in what no longer pulls you out of yourself. That is embodiment. And once embodiment happens consistently, the physical plane begins reorganizing around it, not because you're forcing results, but because things have changed. And so the correction of the interpretation of things getting worse is this. If you connected all the dots clearly, when things feel like they're getting worse, what is often happening is this. Your awareness has increased. Your old patterns are now visible. Your current identity is being destabilized. Your subconscious is trying to reassert familiarity. The physical world has not fully caught up to the internal shift. Contradiction is testing whether the new identity is real or not. And the old self is attempting to get one more reaction out of you so it can survive. That is what's happening. It's not punishment. It's not proof that is not working. It's not evidence that you should turn back. It's transition. The collapse of the old baseline, the instability that comes before reorganization, the phase where the old identity loses authority and the new identity is asked to be held. So the correct interpretation is no longer things are getting worse. The correct interpretation is the old identity is losing control. And that one shift is interpretation change, and that one shift changes everything. Because the moment you interpret the phase correctly, you stop feeding it with fear. You stop reinforcing it with panic. And you stop rebuilding the thing that was supposed to die. And my final notes for you guys is this. You were never merely trying to improve your life. You're trying to become someone else. And becoming someone else does not feel smooth to the part of you that was organized around being the current self. The old identity will not usually leave in silence. It will leave through pressure, through contradiction, through emotional resurfacing, through instability, through one final attempt to convince you that nothing is changing. That is why things often appear to get worse before they get better. Because before the new identity becomes natural, the old one has to lose its hold. Before the physical reflection updates, the internal structure has to shift. Before the new self stabilizes, the old self has to be denied through the reactions that it used to feed. That is why the process feels harder right before breakthrough. Not because life is moving against you, because the old identity is closest to death. And the only real question at that point is this. Will you build identity out of contradiction one more time? Or will you remain who you chose to become until reality has no choice but to reflect it? That is the entire game. That is the mechanism. That is why things get worse before they get better. I'll see you guys in the next one.